Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe.
And I am Mark Stan. A huge thank you, as always, to the people who keep this show going, you wonderful listeners, but also our patrons and academates on the Bestseller Academy. And we have two new patrons this week. And can we all budge up at the back and make some room for them? First on board is Jan Carr. Thank you, Jan. More about Jan later. And then Sherry Enright, who sent us this delightful message via Patreon. Sherry said, I've just finished season 1 as I discovered you guys late in the game after listening to several other podcasts and losing interest. So we've passed that test. You have me jumping off the procrastination ship into the unknown sea, but I'm ready to swim, brackets right. And to prove how fun, informative and inspiring your podcast is, I just became a patron. My first ever monetary support of a podcast. You two are so fantastic that I cracked open my pocketbook. Well done. Well, Sherry, thank you so much. We hope to be your lifeboat in the sea of literature and mixed metaphors. So thank you, Sherry.
Thank you
so
Sherry.
Much.
Absolutely brilliant. And thank you to everyone that's supporting that show. And if you would like to join Sherry, pop over to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. We say the general rule is if we've inspired you in any way in your writing, please support this podcast. And there's lots of goodies you get for doing that. Mr. Stay, we're not going to talk about the weather today because I think you pointed out to me last week that I always talk about the weather. But then we are British, yes. And that's our right, isn't it? It's our birthright to talk about the weather.
Yeah, the last 340-odd episode. And by not talking about the weather, we're still talking about the weather. So, no, it's a lovely clear day.
But how has your week been? I hear you had the most incredible event. I got a very excited text from you after an event in London in Waterstones, which I was delighted to hear about. Tell me about your exciting adventure last week.
Yes, I was the Q&A person at Joe Abercrombie's big event at Waterstones Piccadilly, and it was brilliant. It was sold out like a couple of weeks before it was on. I think the only event on his tour to sell out, and that's because I was there, obviously.
Yeah.
But it was Waterstones Piccadilly's first in-person live event since the end of lockdown. So there was a lot to celebrate, frankly. Lots of people wearing masks. It was really good. It was all set up. It was all nice and clean, nice and spaced out. And Joe was terrific. Joe's such a great person to interview, as you know. You just ask him one question, and he goes off on one for 10 minutes. Yeah, but what was great, and what I've really missed is readers in a room. For an event like that, it's like doing theatre or comedy. You read the room, you get a level, you get that they're relaxed, that they're enjoying themselves, they're asking great and engaging questions, which was lovely. And I think, it's great for Joe as well, because anything like that, where if you're an author, you're meeting your readers, you're meeting the people who actually, fork out money and read your book and they tell you what they love and they tell you the bits that they loved. And Joe especially has to sign some very strange stuff. Terrible insults to people in the books.
Really?
Yeah. It was terrific. It was so good to be back at a lot. And I know there's a lot of uncertainty over these kind of in-store book events. I mean, Waterstones Piccadilly can do it because it's big. If you're a little indie bookshop, do you really want to cram people in there? That kind of thing is. We're still not quite there yet, I think. But it was great to get in a room with a bunch of readers like that.
I think it's such an important part of the journey for a writer as well. I think it's like we're building something in the Academy called Spotlights, and the idea is that all of these different milestones that you want to try and reach as an author, and one of them is like doing your first book tour or doing your first book signing. And I think this idea of meeting your readers, if you think about so many places in the creative world where you do get to meet your fan base, as it were. I mean, if you're a musician, you're up on stage and you're getting like thousands of people like screaming and yelling, and it's like the ultimate in some ways. But for authors, we're stuck in our little rooms writing away, and we often don't know about who's reading it, who's enjoying it. And I think during those book meets, you often really get to hear some of those stories from people about how your books have changed someone's life or just how much they've appreciated your work. And so I think it's a really good goal for every author to eventually get to that point where they do that book tour. And even more so, like you say, because of COVID and the fact that there's been such a lack of face-to-face, human contact, it really links the two together. And so, I encourage everyone to add that to their kind of wish list, their dream declaration of what they want to do. But what a great place to be. Like we've been talking for like the last year and a half about the challenges of COVID, but like you say, it's so much more than just a book event, isn't it? It's a kind of a reopening of this world that we once knew. And I for one am really excited about it. And Waterstones doesn't get much bigger than that. What is the biggest bookstore in London? Is it Waterstones or is it Foyles still?
Oh, you know what? I'm not sure. It's one or t'other. They're both whoppers,
massive.
Absolute whoppers. I was talking to Helen, who was running the event there, because just the week before, a young woman tweeted that she'd managed to get herself locked into Covent Garden after the Waterstones Covent Garden after they closed. There's a picture of her sort of doing a selfie going, biting her lips as if to say, whoopsie, this is bad news. I'm stuck at a bookshop all on my own overnight.
Was she all by herself?
Well, Covent Garden has a basement as well, and there's so many little nooks and crannies where you can get completely lost. And of course, Waterstones Piccadilly, 6 floors, and they're huge. And it's that thing of, does someone sort of bury themselves under a pyramid of books, and then waits till the lights go out and then starts, goes on a rampage or something.
There's a question for readers. Has anyone ever been locked in a bookstore? And if so, which book did you pick to read whilst you wait for the doors to open the next morning? Right? I mean, it could be worse places to be stuck for the night, right? As long as you got a torch.
Absolutely.
As long as you got a torch, it'd be like kind of being a 6-year-old on steroids under your duvet cover, just hoping nobody comes in the middle of the night. That's brilliant. Have you ever been locked in a bookstore? And if so, why? What happened? Tell us the story. We'll read it out on the podcast. And another question: if you could pick your dream bookshop to do your first or your next book signing, where would it be and why? So maybe you've come across a really interesting bookstore in the middle of, somewhere in the other side of the world that you've always thought that'd be lovely. Tell us about your favourite bookstores that you would like to do a book signing, and we'll read those out as well. That'd be a bit of fun.
Also,
Excellent.
Just want to say thank you to a bunch of listeners came up and said hello at the Joe Abercrombie event, which was lovely. So it was nice. Saw quite a few listeners there. So they're real, Mr. D. They're not just bots. There are real people listening to this right now. So
that's what I miss. I do envy not being near and around London and being able to be at these events, because I would just love that, being stuck out here on the edge of the Pacific Ocean.
Come over.
I know. I'm planning at some point. Once they open up all of the restrictions, of course, right? But it'd be absolutely brilliant. But no, I'm so glad that you got to meet some listeners, and it's kind of fun, isn't it? Because I know some podcasts do these podcast tours. Have you ever seen that, Mark? A bit like book tours, but they actually go around the country and they kind of end up in town halls and things.
Funnily enough, this came up in the every week on the Academy. We have our post-podcast craft chat where myself and Academates, we talk about the previous episode. I don't know how it came up, but one of our Academates, Christopher, he was saying, have you thought of doing live shows? Have you thought of doing a tour? And I thought, well, Mr. D was in the UK. Maybe we would have done that by now.
Let's do this. All right, here's the thing. If we can get Waterstones in Piccadilly, maybe have a chat with them. Everyone start emailing them. Say, get the bestseller experiment to do a live show from.
Ask for Helen.
What do you think? What do you think, Mark? Where would we do it? When I'm next in the UK, I'm genuinely serious here. This would be a laugh and a half. I'd like to meet some listeners. Yeah. Let's pick a bookshop somewhere in London that would be easy to get to, and we'll do a live episode from there. What do you reckon?
Yeah, get a few of our author friends along,
And maybe one day, if you ever come over this side of the pond, we'll do the return leg in Vancouver, or that'd be a laugh.
That would be.
We shouldn't talk about this live on air, should we? No, it's not a good idea.
I know. We've got some listeners who'll get very excited about that and be like, "Well, when's it happening? Is it next week or the week after?"
Oh, well, who knows? Who knows? Who knows? I mean, look, the world's opening up again. We can start moving around, and that'd be a lot of fun. Anyway, before we make too many other promises and commitments, we better get into our interview this week.
Yeah.
We have a brilliant interview this week. Tell us about Awais Khan.
Awais Khan is the author of In the Company of Strangers and No Honor, which is his latest book and has been getting the most extraordinary acclaim. Awais returns to the podcast because he spoke to us for a deep dive, episode 239, and I'll put a link in the show notes for that. But I wanted to get Awais back on because he's had the most incredible year with his new book, and it was capped by an article in Punk Noir that declared him to be one of the most important writers in the world today. And I thought, well, that's a lot has changed since we last spoke to him. So I wanted to speak to him about the lessons he's learned since the publication of his debut novel. He talks about working to deadlines and the differences between storytellers, writers, and documenters.
Excellent. So let's dive in and listen to Mark chatting with the wonderful Awais Khan.
Awais Khan, welcome back to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today, sir?
Hi, Mark. It's great to be back at the Bestseller Experiment, and thank you so much for having me. I'm well. Hope you're well too.
Very, very good. Thank you. Now, long-term listeners will know that we last spoke for a deep dive, which was episode 239. And folks, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. That was October 2019. And back then, we discussed writing courses. You just published your debut novel, In the Company of Strangers. And I think it's fair to say, as an author, you had a fairly low profile. Now, when I simply put your first name into Google, you pop up. I mean, literally, autocomplete says a little picture of you and everything. And is your new novel, No Honor, is getting the most amazing acclaim. And then the other day, I see an article in Punk Noir magazine with your photo, and the headline read, "One of the most important writers today, Awais Khan. You're a superstar, man. Can we discuss what's happened in the last couple of years? Maybe let's start with the experience of publishing In the Company of Strangers and pick up from there. What were the biggest lessons learned from that?
Well, first of all, I can't believe that it's almost been 2 years since we last spoke. I was thinking that maybe it was 2020, but now that you reminded me, it's surprising how quickly time flies.
Yeah.
And yes, as you know, within the Company of Strangers, it was my debut novel. I was very close to it, and we were having such a hard time placing it with publishers because nobody thought that anyone would want to read about the secrets and lies of Pakistan's elite society. But thankfully, the novel, I mean, it was published by a small publisher, but it went on to sell a lot of copies, both in print and online. And it got some pretty rave reviews in news publications and by many authors. So I think that sort of set the things in motion. But the kind of acclaim I've gotten with No Honor, it's totally unprecedented. I had not expected this kind of acclaim. So I'm very happy with the way things have turned out. But I think, yes, your debut sort of set you up for what's to come.
It certainly does. It certainly does. Was there anything about the process of publication of In the Company of Strangers any lessons that you took forward for No Honor?
Well, the one lesson I did learn was that it takes a long time sometimes to get published or to find a publisher. Within the Company of Strangers, I'd waited for almost 2 years for a deal. But when the deal happened, then there was another deal that happened really quickly after that, which was with Simon & Schuster or In the Company of Strangers. So I went in with an open mind. I knew that it could happen very soon, very quickly, but I was prepared to wait for as long as necessary because I'd been through that within the company. I knew that in publishing, things can certainly take their time.
Yes. Patience and perseverance are essential for this game. Let's talk about your new book, No Honor, and it really is getting the most incredible acclaim. And am I right in thinking that it started with a short story?
Yes, I'd written a short story for the Aleph Review. It's a very prestigious literary magazine. So I remember it was published in 2018, I think. And my agent took one look at it and she was like, you have to expand this into a novel. This is a very important story and it cannot, you have to sort of expand it. And that's when I started thinking about it. But also with No Honor, there were a lot of places where I got my inspiration from, especially with if I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there was a very high-profile murder of a social media celebrity in Pakistan who was killed by her own brother for honor. So that sort of got me thinking about if someone as popular as her would fall prey to this, then what chance did women in rural Pakistan stand against this?
When it comes to expanding a short story, particularly one on a subject that is, I think contentious is probably the wrong word, but it's certainly one that arouses passions. How do you go expanding a short story like that? Where do you start? Is it with the characters or the themes, or because you don't just want to start padding it out for the sake of it? Where do you start? With those first building blocks for turning it into a novel.
With No Honor, it was easier for me because the short story that I'd written was more or less a prologue, so it functioned as a prologue in many ways. So in that. But in order to expand from a short novel, I think you need to focus the most on character and especially on the story and plot, because you have to see whether the plot has any legs in it. If it doesn't have any legs, then you can't really expand it into a novel. It remains a short story. But yeah, you have to take all of these things into account: the character, the plot, the overall story, and if there's enough meat in the story, then yes, you can expand it. But with No Honor, I thought there was, and my agent helped me through it, and we came up with this novel that was eventually picked up by Orinda then. So yeah.
Excellent stuff. Now, the punk noir interview, if we can talk about that, I thought was really interesting because the writer of that interview, Stephen J. Golds, he thinks there are three kinds of writers. So he talks about the writer, Tobias Wolff, the storyteller, Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, and the documenter, John Steinbeck, who he says is also a storyteller. But he thinks you're a rarity, a writer that combines all three, which is a huge compliment. But I mean, these are easy categories, reductive categories. We can argue about those all day. But is that combination something that you strive for, being a storyteller, a writer? By that, I guess they mean a stylist, and a documenter, someone who's taking real life. How did you feel about that?
Well, to be honest, I'm very shocked and pleasantly surprised, actually. And Stephen's been absolutely very kind with his words. And yeah, it was very interesting because with No Honor, this is exactly what I was hoping for, to be able to be a documenter, but to also be a storyteller at the same time. Because sometimes when people are reading fiction hits you harder than nonfiction, sometimes if it's done right. So that is what I was trying to do with No Honor, to basically shine a light on what went on in Pakistan, but to tell it in a way that people could read it as an engaging story. And probably, yeah, that's what I said. Like fiction, sometimes it hits harder than nonfiction. So that was the ultimate aim. So I don't know if I'm all three, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I think Stephen's just being too kind with me, but it was really nice to see that in any case.
Do you have a preference yourself as a reader? Do you prefer storytellers, writers, or documenters?
I actually love all sorts of writing, but to be honest, I do like storytelling the most, because that way you can really deep dive into the novel and then get finished in a day or two. With a documentary sort of piece, then you have to think about it. You spend a lot of time thinking and going through it, and you think about it long after turning the final page. But with a novel that's predominantly a storytelling thing, then you sort of race through it, I feel.
Excellent. We're obsessed with writers' habits on this podcast. We'd love to know what a day is like with you, what your writing habits are like. Are you a write every day kind of author?
I'm not at all a write every day kind of author, because I write whenever the inspiration strikes me, and the inspiration doesn't really strike me that often. What I do is when I'm writing something, I work really well with deadlines. So if someone gives me a deadline, then I can deliver on time. But if someone doesn't give me a deadline, then I will keep delaying it and indefinitely. So like, for example, for No Honor, when it was picked up, before it went on submission, I'd been working on it for 3 years. So my agent told me that I want this book by, I think, February the 1st, 2020. She was like, do not go one day beyond it. And I remember it was December when she told me that, and I was literally 3/4 way through the book, and I went in all guns blazing, and I finished it. And I finished it right on time. So I work really well with deadlines. So give me a deadline and I'll deliver. Otherwise, you'll find me forever. So yeah, that's my process.
When before you had a deadline, when you were writing in the company of strangers, and you're writing essentially to get an agent and maybe get published, how did you motivate yourself to finish that book without that finish line in sight?
Yes. So within the company of strangers, what happened was that I was taking the Faber 6-month course, the Write Your Novel online course. So that had its own motivation. So we had this really nice group of writers who were all working on their novels, and they were literally going ahead with the novel. And I was like, I don't want to be left behind. So that was my motivation at the time, that I wanted to finish it just like them. So for me, I think you have to push me in order to get me to finish something. But once I am sort of suitably pushed, then I can deliver.
Okay.
So yeah.
And when your agent gives you that deadline, say February the 1st, do you sit down and plan out how much you're going to write every day, or do you just burn the candle at both ends and go for it?
I burn the candle at both ends. And that's exactly what I do. I feel that I'm I don't know about uniquely, but I am kind of blessed with the fact that I can survive with very little sleep. So that really works in my favor. So I can sleep for 3 hours and I'd be fresh the next day, or at least until the work day is over. So that's I think that's one of the things that I'm very I feel about, because that way I can work harder. So this is what I did. I burned the candle from both ends, and literally went in and finished it and delivered it by February the 1st, 2020. So I still remember the date because she was very adamant about it. She was like, I'm not going to budge this time. So yeah.
Okay. I just want, just for your own health, Awais, is that sustainable? Is that, is there a danger it could drive you a little mad?
Yes, it's definitely not sustainable, and I don't do it all the time. I just meant that I can when I want to, but no, because after a few days I sort of crash. So it's definitely not a very healthy habit, but it can come in handy when you're in a tight spot. So that's one of those things. So I guess.
Fair enough. Okay. When you were saying that you write when you're inspired. Otherwise, when you're not feeling inspired, what are you doing in terms of keeping the creative engine turning? Are you keeping notes? Are you just thinking about future ideas? How does that creativity simmer in the background for you?
Yeah. Well, I'm not. I love taking notes, and I love drawing up plot lines and everything. But the problem is that I don't end up following them. So I could have a very elaborate outline in front, but when I do sit in front of my laptop, the story takes its own pace, and it sort of goes on its own. So I don't really see the use of me drawing up elaborate outlines. So what I do is I just think about it now. And if there are some really pertinent plot points, then I'll just make a note of them. But I don't do those elaborate outlines anymore, because they are of no use to me, right, ultimately.
Right. So you're very much a pantser kind of author, where you've been inspired by something and then you just jump in.
Yes, I'm definitely a pantser. And when I'm not feeling inspired, I just tell the other person to give me a deadline.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. Having been through the experience of the last couple of years of doing the course, of getting an agent, and do go back and listen to the deep dive, folks. It's brilliant, because the biggest lesson we discovered is always check your junk mail, because that's where you realise an agent had got back to you. And an extraordinary, publication of 2 novels. What's your advice for writers out there who are sort of slugging their way through a first draft?
Well, all I can say is that I understand where you're at. And believe me, I understand more than most, because I'm a Pakistani author, and Pakistan has no publishing industry to speak of. We have no literary agents here. So writing in Pakistan is literally a labor of love, because you have no idea, you have very little expectation of ever getting published when you're in Pakistan, because I mean, like I said, publishing is not a very important industry in this country, despite having a population of over 220 million people. So when I say that, and I understand, I do understand, it's always a struggle, and you always wonder that all this work that you're putting in, will it ever benefit you in the end? The answer is that yes, it does benefit you. It might take time. Obviously, there's no hard and fast rule of how to get published, but it does happen if you keep at it. And there are so many times when I wanted to give up, when I had given up actually, but then something would happen, some little thing, some little motivation here or there, some course I would take, and then that motivation would I'd start writing again. So my advice would definitely be to never give up and keep writing. And usually we know what we're doing. So if someone is criticizing you for the sake of criticism, then don't listen to them, because we know what we're doing usually. So yeah. So just do your bit and let the universe do the rest.
How fantastic. I love that. We talk a lot on the podcast about the importance of community for writers. The fact that, I mean, I'm very lucky. I live in a place where there's literary festivals everywhere. There are bookshops everywhere. You know, it's wherever I look, there is a writing community. We have a great writing community on the Academy and for our patrons, and on the Bestseller Experiment Facebook group. But again, if you're there in Lahore, Pakistan, and there's no industry, how do you go about finding like-minded writers? Like yourself? Was the Faber Academy helpful there, or where did you go before that, and where's your community now?
So yeah, in Pakistan there isn't much of a community. I mean, yes, we now that I'm published and everything, I have connected with a few other writers from Pakistan, and we're a group of like-minded people. But imagine this: Lahore is a city over 12-13 million, consists of 7 or 8 people. So you see, it is that hard to find people who you connect with in a city like Lahore. It just goes on to show that there's so much to be done in a country like Pakistan. There are so many talented people here, so many readers here, but unfortunately, it is all going to waste. Their talent is going to waste. And but yeah, community is so important. I basically have my actual community in London, and that is why I really like visiting London, because all my friends are there, all my writing friends, my agent, my publishers, they're all there. So whenever I'm in London, it's literally like a kid in Disneyland or something. So I'm kind of like that. So yeah.
Well, I sincerely hope, Awais, that there are writers in Pakistan who listen to this who get inspired by you, because it certainly can be done. And I'm looking at, folks, if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, you'll see behind Awais a bookshelf rammed with books. And I know books are quite hard to come by. English language books are quite hard to come by in Pakistan. So where are you getting those? Because we've had conversations where you've tried to get my book, and I've said, try the book depository. And I don't think it's one of the countries they don't deliver to. Is that correct?
Yes, they don't deliver to Pakistan. I bought the ebook actually of your book, but I'm desperately waiting to buy the print book, because it's such a beautiful cover, and I do judge a book by its cover, unfortunately.
No, I understand.
Yeah, but we do have a few really good independent bookshops here that do order in the majority of the titles, like any bestsellers out there, they will get them, but they don't get them all. So it's always a struggle. I'm always nudging them that get this book, get that book, but it takes so much time. And then it doesn't help that the books get stuck at customs. So I ordered a few of my book, a few copies of No Honor, and they got stuck at customs, and I had to pay an eye-watering duty on them. So it's just that Pakistan makes it so much harder to get books into the country. So yeah, it's really, if people are watching it, this is just one shelf. The actual shelf is I'll show you. Yeah, so this is what it looks like. This is my actual collection.
My God, that's like a library.
Yeah. It's like I've got 4,000 books in my collection. So yeah.
Wow, that is incredible. So if you're listening to this just on the audio podcast, what I've just seen there, well, it looks like a bookshop, basically, Awais. You've got your own library there. It's just amazing. So fantastic.
I swear, the booksellers in Lahore, whenever they see my face, they literally brighten up because they know that this guy will literally be bankrupt here. So they're always so happy when they see me. So yeah.
Brilliant stuff. What's coming next for you, Awais? What's inspiring you now? Do you have a deadline?
That's the thing. You see, I don't have a deadline, which is why I'm dawdling. I am supposed to be writing another book for Orenda, and Karen, my publisher, has been very generous. So far, she hasn't sort of asked me even once what's going on with the book. So she's being very patient, but I am, sort of... I'm not doing well with that. So I really need her to give me a deadline so that I can deliver it on time. Otherwise, I'll spend all my time dawdling. Because what happens is that I write a few pages and then there's this book that takes my fancy and I'm like, oh, let's read this book, or hey, let's do this and let's log on to social media and see what's going on. So there's so many distractions. And unless I'm on a deadline, I'm always falling prey to distractions.
Well, I mean, if those distractions are reading other people's books, that surely counts as a research and inspiration, doesn't it? I mean, that's not, that's a perfectly legitimate way to spend your time, especially if you've got 4,000 books to read, so that's not, I think that's perfectly legit, don't you?
Well, you're not helping me by saying this, because that will only sort of go on to cement my habit of getting distracted. But yes, I do believe in supporting other writers. I always make it a point to buy their books and to make sure I promote them as much as I can through my platforms. And I feel that writers, we're such a small community, and if we don't look after each other, then who will? Especially in a country like Pakistan, we don't have a lot of writers. And the people in Pakistan, I mean, they're all very nice generally, but there's some people in Pakistan who take pleasure in pulling you down. And this is something that I have experienced time and again. And this is why I try to avoid that. And I try to support everyone I come across, because there's no harm in supporting the other person. You won't lose any readers or any money over supporting someone else. So I try to do my bit.
Oh, fantastic. You're an inspiration to us all of us. Absolutely fantastic. And where can folks find you online?
So I am everywhere. So you just have to click, I'm Awais Khan author, Awais Khan author, on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook. And you can also look me up at the Writing Institute. I'm everywhere.
Like I said, folks, just put his first name into Google and there he is. Awais, it's been an absolute joy speaking to you, and it's been brilliant seeing your career just go so amazingly well over the last couple of years. And here's looking forward to the next few years and speaking to you again, maybe in the real world sometime soon. So thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Thank you so much, Mark, for having me. And it's been an absolute pleasure. And I don't feel like 2 years have passed. It seems like yesterday that we were talking. And I'm keeping everything crossed that the UK moves Pakistan to the amber list so that I can come and visit and hopefully meet you.
Hopefully soon. Brilliant stuff. Take care, man. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. I've always said it, Mark, haven't I? You've got to love a deadline. You've got to love a deadline. And Awais is our shining light. Isn't it fascinating how the difference of creating that deadline, what a difference it makes?
Really does. Really, really does. I mean, I feel I'm a write every day author. I feel like I'm fairly prolific, but having a finish line does make it. Well, for a start, it just helps me organize. It helps me prioritize what's important, what needs to go to the front of the queue, and what needs to what can be kind of held back. But yeah, it's and it's if you don't have a deadline, then we talk about public declarations. Make one of your own. Declare it to the world. I'm gonna as we did in our first season of the podcast, the first 12 months. That was how it all started. We said we're going to do this within 12 months. So, do it. Be brave. Do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we actually start everyone's journey off in the academy by getting them to create a deadline. I mean, it's the beginning. It's the beginning of the journey. And I've always loved that quote from Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People: think with the end in mind. And I think so much so with books. I mean, let's think about building a house, for example. We talk about brick by brick, one brick at a time. It's quite similar to writing a book. The thing is, there is a structure to a house. You know that the roof is what finishes it. The trouble with a book, there's no potential end unless you decide to get there and write it. And I think I've noticed actually, just by working with lots of different people, being in writing groups, obviously all of great feedback and in the academy, people that don't have deadlines don't know when to end. And sometimes that book project can become a lifelong goal. And I know there's people out there listening to going, yeah, actually, that's me. I've been working on this book for 10 years. We know you're out there, and we're here to encourage you, because really the only reason why people end up writing and rewriting and chucking 100,000 words away and starting again and, going back to something they started 4 years ago that maybe isn't finished, it's because ultimately, usually there's no deadline. It's no deadline. So, and Awais is living proof of that. I mean, he said, without a deadline, it's just like a ship that's floating around in the ocean with no rudder. So I really want to encourage people like Awais. You can see what happens when you focus. Deadlines are like probably the most important thing as a writer. If you don't have a deadline, you may never, ever finish, ever. In fact, there's another deadline, and that's the end of our life. And one of them is going to come first, right? So, get the book deadlines down. And actually, you know what, Mark? It's about practicing it as well, isn't it? Because when you finish your first book, you get better at, I think, kind of hitting deadlines with more practice.
Well, I know a few authors who might disagree with that, but yeah, Douglas Adams for one. But yes, I think you're absolutely right. One other thing that came up in the conversation with Awais is perseverance. And there's a slight difference because, we talk about people who spend 10 years writing the same book or whatever, and they might say, well, that's perseverance. Well, get it over the line and finish it. And I'm talking about people who've got stuff published or maybe finished something and have put it out there, and it's the big moment, and this is it, and here we are. And then the world doesn't change. The world is exactly the same. And then you've got to go through this again and then again. And I know there are people out there who can feel, oh, blimey, I keep doing this. And Awais was talking about this, I keep trying to get my words out there, but keep getting knocked back, or maybe I feel like I'm just shouting into a void. But as Awais says, never give up. And it was interesting because just today I saw an article that someone had been speaking to the film director and writer Guillermo del Toro, who's just one of my favorite filmmakers,
He's amazing.
Pan's Labyrinth, whatever. And he was saying that he has written 20 screenplays that never got made, and he estimates that is because he was saying it's he says each one takes 6 to 10 months of work. So he reckons that's 16 years of his life on stuff that will never see the light of day. And that's Oscar winner Guillermo del Toro saying, 16 years of stuff that will never see the sun. But he says it's experience and skill improvement. So this is the thing, you may feel it's going into the void. That book might not impact the way you wanted it to, or it might not get picked up by an agent or a publisher, but the next thing, perseverance in this game, you've really got to hang in there. I mean, it was at least 10 years before I started getting even the vaguest nibbles of interest in my stuff, and I have down days. I had a day last week where I got some news about something, and I was like, just all the wind goes out the sails. You just think, why am I? And literally 48 hours later, I've got a bit of news about, oh, brilliant. That's good. Excellent. Oh, that is rather good. So it's perseverance. It's a rocky old ride. It is a roller coaster. But yeah, you've just got to keep banging your head, man.
Well, absolutely. And I think not to kind of like discourage people, but I think writing is more about the big moments, isn't it? I mean, writing is a life journey. It's a life exploration. The more and more we've done this podcast, the more I've started to realize that, interestingly. I've started to realize how it benefits people's mental health. It's a way of getting stuff out of you onto the page. In some ways, the success really is the icing on the cake. I mean, it's a big cake though, right? It's a massive cake because there's so many other things that we get from writing. And I want to encourage everyone that every single word that you put down on the page, every single word that you write today will make you a better writer. That's part of the journey. That's part why we show up here. It's about exploring our potential as writers and exploring our world as writers. And I really do think that we have to hang on to that and remember that, if we put in the very best of what we are on the page, it obviously increases the chances of that success coming. But to not lose sight of the fact that, life is a journey. It's not about necessarily the destination. It's about learning and growing through that journey. And that's what we are as writers. And I think it's so incredible that we actually have this potential for something huge to happen. Because there's many people going through life on those types of journeys where they're working at something and there is no kind of like big holy grail at the end or big kind of upside or potential to have their book on the shelf. In many other forms of life, it's just about getting through those days and growing, and whatever challenge someone has. And everyone's got a challenge. But I think writers are a really unique group of people. It's such a unique outlet. And it's funny because, we've been doing this podcast nearly 5 years. And it's starting to, like, the depth of what we've been learning about, it's really starting to percolate up for me now. I'm really starting to see a much, much, much bigger life picture around it. And that's what I find fascinating. So yeah, I think when we hear about these stories of people who are kind of on the verge of giving up, maybe what they're saying is, I need a break for now. I need to take a few weeks off, because I promise you, you might want to leave writing, but writing will never leave you. If you've ever
put that on a t-shirt,
you're gonna put that on a t-shirt. But it's true. It's like if you've ever had that experience of being inspired to write when you've read a book and you've sat down to write, writing has got you for the rest of your life, whether you like it or not. So people can try and run away, but it's a bit like that game you see at the school fates where you're attached to a bungee cord. You can run away from it, and at some point you get flying back to it. And I learned that, Mark, through music. I learned the same thing through music, and it's a quote I've always said in music. You can try and leave music, but music will never leave you. It will take you as a writer, when you've quit, I promise you, it'll take you one book that inspires you to get you back writing again. Maybe one podcast, maybe one story, one interview, someone else's story, but you will be writing for the rest of your life. So it's okay to have a break, but you'll be back.
Yeah.
And you will get that book finished.
Yeah. And I think we can put a bit too much emphasis on things like the big publishing events like the book launch. We were talking at the beginning about Joe Abercrombie's launch, and that was all good fun and everything. But what a lot of people don't tell authors before they're published is that publication day can be a little bit anticlimactic. You can come out of that thinking, well, is that it? Because you've been building up. It's like Christmas morning, you think it's going to be Christmas and Easter and Hanukkah and everything all rolled into one, and it's just, oh God, I've got to keep doing this. I've got to write another one, and it can, and those weeks after, you can get a little bit deflated because, like I say, the world hasn't shifted. You're not suddenly walking on rose petals everywhere you go, but this is what the gig is. You are here to write. The moments that matter are the ones that come completely out of the blue, where someone goes, I'm talking about making contact where a reader goes, oh, I bloody love this. This was great. I really enjoyed that. Those are the moments. And they are, I mean, in lockdown, they're harder to come by. But they do come and they do happen. And this goes back last week. Abby Silver was saying, if you've read something you've loved by an author, let them know. Don't hesitate. It makes their day. It will lift them out of that slump. So it is important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's super important as well to know that the what you get paid back for writing a book is like dividend payments. If you do get a big major deal with a big publisher, amazing. And there might be a big paycheck, which would be fantastic. But for many people, the launch of the book is the beginning of the process where you get dividend payments. Like even 5 years down the road, we're still getting 5-star reviews for Back to Reality. And reading those little reviews and thinking, oh my gosh, that's great. Somebody new found the book today. Someone loved the book. And you can continuously get a drip dividend payment, as I like to think of it, for all the effort and work and intensity that you put in writing that book. The book lasts forever. For the rest of your life, people will be discovering your book. And I think that there's no greater feeling in this world than knowing that your book has in some way made a difference in someone's world. And that's, I think, the longer tail that we don't often focus on, because it's often always focused around the big event, like you say.
Yeah.
But it can be both. For people it happens to, and then it takes off and then it grows and it starts to get the momentum. That's incredible as well. And that can always happen as well. And I think we should never stop dreaming or believing about that as writers, because we get to do that. Like I said before, there's so many other professions where you don't get to do that. You put the hard work in, job's done. Okay, what do we do next? There's no drip feeding of feedback for years to come. There's no potential of a Netflix series at the end of the road. It's just like you do your job, you finish, and then you start the new job, and that's it. So we are really privileged in that regard to be as writers, to be working in that space. Absolutely. It's amazing stuff. What else jumped out for you that Awais mentioned, Mark?
I love this idea of the storyteller, the writer, and the documenter. And I mean, obviously, it's really reductive, but it's an interesting conversation, because it does you do start thinking about what kind of writer you are. Are you the storyteller with the great stylist? Are you the writer who's focused more on the prose? Are you the documenter who tells true stories? Someone like Awais and John Steinbeck, or are you a combination of all three? So I think having a little of each. Having that storyteller side to yourself, the Stephen King, the J.K. Rowling side, where you're weaving wonderful tales with great prose, the great prose of the writer, and with a little bit of the emotional truth of the documenter. It's a fascinating division of responsibility in a way for a writer, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it's a really unique way of looking at it, isn't it? And I think that to hear it put in the way that Awais put it, that's what I love about every author has a different set of experiences, but the way they can shine a light on a concept always gives us a different way of looking at it, which is brilliant. And there was also one thing about Awais that we mentioned about his short story. Tell us about a really interesting link between him and one of our Academy members.
It was only when I listened back the second time, just before we started recording, I thought, oh, that rings a bell. And of course, the short story that became No Honor was published in the Aleph Review, which is, a great literary magazine in Pakistan. And his short story was first published in there. And of course, last week, in the wins section, we reported that our Academy, Osman Hanif, had his story featured, accepted by the Aleph Review. So, Osman, you're on your way, man. Just there's Awais right there. I tell you what, as well, I bet if Osman got in touch with Awais, they're going to be, Awais was talking about how he wants to support other writers, and he really does. His Twitter account is amazing. Social media is just amazing. So Osman, go, my man. Fantastic. Here we go.
God, if there's an omen, if ever I've seen one, that's fantastic news. Brilliant stuff. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to Awais for coming on the show this week. Absolutely brilliant. And you know, we always love a story that has stories always have chapters, and that was kind of chapter 2 of Awais's appearance on the Bestseller Experiment. Can't wait to see where chapter 3 and the rest of the plot unfolds. Now we've introducing this new feature called Spotlight, which is where we talk about a particular author that we're very excited about in the Bestseller Academy. And this week we have the incredible Jeanette Carr. And Mark, tell us about something very special that she's doing with her book.
Well, Jen, a couple of years ago, Jen published this book here, The Wonder Girls. I've got a copy here, which is terrific. And it's about girls standing up to the black shirts. It's set in England, 1936. And the black shirts were British supporters of Adolf Hitler. And it's about a girl gang who stand up to them. And it's a cracking read. And actually, if you like the wartime setting of my book, The Crowfolk, do check out The Wonder Girls. And Jan has got a sequel on the way, The Wonder Girls Resist, which looks absolutely, it's got gorgeous cover, absolutely gorgeous cover. And she's doing it as a Kickstarter, which I've backed. So if you go onto Kickstarter and look up J.M. Carr and The Wonder Girls Resist, and we'll put a link in the show notes to it to make it easier for you to find. You can support Jan's wonderful, wonderful book, and it's really, really exciting.
Yeah, and she's in the middle of the Kickstarter. By the time this podcast goes live next Monday, I think there will be around 6 days left. So support your fellow authors and pop over and but also go and have a look at what Jan's done, because I think this is a really great example of a brilliant Kickstarter. If you've thought about doing a Kickstarter, or if you're thinking about raising money for a book launch, or even raising money to write a book, some people use it for, I think this is a great example. So JM, that's M for Mark, and Carr with a double R, Karr. But we'd like to give Jan's book a bit of a spotlight this week to kind of get everyone excited about the launch of it, The Wonder Girls Resist. And we always ask people to kind of write their book hook, and she has a really good one on the Kickstarter site, which is a tween young adult novel about a 1930s girl gang taking on the black shirts. That's the British supporters of Adolf Hitler again. And she's written us a little bit of a blurb as well, just to kind of give you a bit of a taster. So 4,000 child refugees from the Spanish Civil War are due to arrive at Southampton docks. 16-year-old aspiring doctor Letitia is determined to help with the rescue effort. Most of the children are taken to a camp north of the town, but some are under the care, quotes, of a teacher called Easton Fitzgerald, and are billeted at Nettlefield Grange Orphanage. Baby is sure the black shirts are putting kids in peril again. Have they jumped from the frying pan into the fire? Baby and the other Wonder Girls must work out what the fascists are really up to and prevent a Nazi invasion, persuading Letitia to value what she's actually good at. Ooh, that sounds full of adventure and intrigue. So if you're interested in The Wonder Girls Resist, pop over to Jan's Kickstarter, and you can actually get to it by going to her website as well. You can go to jmcarr.com, so that's JM for Mark, CARR.com, and the Kickstarter is launched from there. And we would love to see Janet's Kickstarter get pushed over the edge. She is over halfway, Mark, which is amazing, with a few 6 or 7 days left as this goes live. So best of luck, Jan. We're rooting for you all the way.
Jan.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So, Mark, let's go to social media now. What's been happening on social media?
All sorts of good and wonderful stuff has been happening. We've got, speaking of academates, we've got Michael Kelly, whose book, in fact, came out yesterday, published yesterday, The Lost Theory. And if you go to thelosttheory.com, check that out there. So big congrats to academic Michael Kelly on that, who I believe is going to have his own future spotlight as well. So
absolutely,
check that out. Yep. And we've got another win on the Academy is from Paul Gimson, who says, I've been making painfully slow process, but realised today I'd hit 20,000 words. There's an awful lot to do with those 20,000, but pleasantly surprised that all the bits are there and has added up. Now, 20,000 words, of course, when we first started talking about this podcast, that was quite a key number for you, wasn't it, Mr. D?
It certainly was. Yeah, it was the point where I usually stopped writing and started a different project. And it's also that point. Paul. Yeah, don't do that, Paul. And also, it was the point that Robin Stevens said that that's when she kind of like went 20,000 words in. She thought, I'm rubbish. Why am I doing this? I know my last book sold loads, but this is the worst 20,000 words I've ever written. So if you're coming up to your 20,000 words, just know that is part of the process. You'll beat yourself up. You think you're the worst author in the world. Just get past those 20,000. And great news on Paul just pushing through that. So well done, Paul. That's fantastic news.
Nice one. Rachel Howes on the Bestseller Academy group, Bestseller Experiment group on Facebook. She's finished her book, which is amazing, but instead of writing the end, she's put "Death conquers all." I'm sensing a theme this week, aren't you? So congratulations on finishing your book, Rachel. That's fantastic. I know it's been a long time coming, so huge congrats on doing that.
Brilliant, Rachel. Well done.
A couple more things. And now 200 words a day challenge. It's working for all kinds of people. Sean Brown tagged us on Instagram and he said that I'm nearing my record of 14,000 words for a first draft. I think I'll surpass it this week. My favorite podcast right now from Bestseller Experiment with another interesting and helpful episode. So Sean, huge congrats on that. Keep going, sir. Keep going.
And on the 200-word challenge, Mark, sorry, just interject. We have coming up next month for you a special Academy All-Stars interview with none other than Mark Hood. And Mark Hood is, I guess we'd say he's the kind of like Muhammad Ali of the 200-word challenge. He's the Usain Bolt of the writing world. Mark, if you want to find out how to make writing a habit, definitely listen out for that, because Mark recently surpassed, having started a 200-word challenge, he's recently surpassed, I believe, 600 days that he's had a streak of not missing a day of writing, a minimum of 200 words. So look out for that. And if you want to join him and the many thousands others that are doing this incredible challenge, it's simply and Mark, Mr. Stay, still posting his words up on Twitter. I love it. 200wordchallenge.com. Just pop over to 200wordchallenge.com and join in the fun.
And last but by no means least on social media, our Bestseller Experiment Facebook supporter, Jeff White, he started a YouTube channel. And we talk about this, making connections with readers. And if you can't get out there in the real world, YouTube is a great way to do it. He said, I know I could probably have done it better, but didn't want to let perfect be the enemy of good. And so it went, so onwards and upwards to next week's video. So congrats on that, Jeff. Check it. Jeff White on YouTube.
And a great quote, if ever I've heard one: don't let perfect be the enemy of good. That should go for your books as well, everyone. Just remember, there's no such thing as perfection. Strive to be nearly perfect. All right? It's nearly perfect. All right, Mr. Stable, it's been absolutely brilliant again this week. Congratulations on that amazing event. In conversation with Mark Stay, I think it said, not Q&A. I think it was in conversation. And I'm like, oh, right, that sounds that's got.
I meant to say moderator, and I couldn't think of the word moderator, so I said question and answer person, which just shows it's a long day. It's late here.
It's been a long day. Poor Mark. Okay, poor Mark. He's missed his dinner. I've just had my cereal. It's like not even 11 o'clock in the morning here in Vancouver. I'm chirpy and bright. And in fact, people don't realise this. Every time we do this recording, it is literally end of the day. It's like usually pushing somewhere near 8 o'clock by the time we finish yakking after we've done our recording.
Yeah.
And so, Mr. Stay, he's holding the fort for you guys over there in the east side of the world, on the UK side. And I think it should be recognised that, how you do it, Mark, I don't know, because I'm usually the one who's I'm not able to keep my eyes open, and it's nice and early in the morning for me. But yeah, I think it's going to be a good week, folks. The world is looking a little bit rosier. And remember, folks, if there's one thing that you do this week that you can bank, it will be your writing. For all the other crazy stuff going on in your lives, all this stuff pulling you left, right, centre. Bank those words, because those will still be there the next day and you can build on them. So good luck to everyone this week in your quest in your writing quests and adventures.
I'll tell you what else you can do in between writing. You can subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on your podcatcher of choice. And if you want to say hello, come and find us. We're all over social media. We're at bestsellerexperiment.com. On Facebook, we're Bestseller Experiment. Twitter and Instagram, we are at bestsellerxp.
Brilliant. And don't forget, folks, you can support this podcast by going to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. And if you like the sound of all the stuff that's been happening in the Academy and you like what you've been hearing from some of the successes and wins, you are very welcome to join us. academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. Come on over and fill out your application form there. So, Mr. Stay, hope you have a great writing week this week.
You too, sir.
Excellent stuff. All right, everyone, have a good one. It's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And goodbye from Mark 2. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.